We could only bring this topic to you because of the strategic partnership between the IATR and Jim Peters of the Responsible Hospitality Institute. I first met Jim through the city of Calgary and the work that he was doing there. It was a very impressive exercise to see what they were able to pull together. There had been a reorganization of taxi regulation to bring it closer to the business licensing group that had a very strong relationship with the downtown, with the nighttime economy, with some key owners and visionaries there. And Jim was able to work with that group to get some real wins for some key transportation issues. Calgary prides itself on hospitality being core business. And there are some real success stories there. That's one I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more detail about. We've also been able to work with Jim and RHI to offer webinars, and we're looking forward to doing a bit more of that in the next year as well. So again, I thank everyone for being here this morning, and I'm going to turn the morning over to Jim Peters.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is my second conference. I joined you last year in Chicago and began to learn more about the taxi industry. Even though we have a lot of interaction with the taxis as we deal with nighttime economy issues. So it's great to come back and to meet some people. And Matt was a participant in our annual leadership summit we hold in DC, where we bring together representatives from various associations that represent downtown development and hospitality and transportation and public safety and planning and economic development, where we just try to draw more attention to this idea that sociability, nightlife, the nighttime economy are all important elements of a city, and the role of your constituents, whether they be regulating or providing the service of transportation, is an integral part of the transportation system as we talk about nightlife. Now, the past couple of days, as I've sat through the different sessions, I've been able to gain some more insights about the taxi industry. First of all, it seems like there's a sense that you don't get a lot of respect, that you're just kind of there and you exist, and it's viewed almost as a tangential business sector that people don't appreciate you. It's composed of a lot of independent businesses who tend to be competitive, and therefore trying to get them to work together is very challenging because they view each other in a very suspicious way. You're always challenged as an industry to be able to maintain the value of your investments by having qualified drivers who can provide the service that you need, as well as to assure the safety of the public. But you seem to all be very much service-oriented, that you see yourselves as being really involved in customer service and meeting the needs of the consumer and facilitating and providing opportunities for the consumer by making more efficient services available. You're currently being impacted by demographics, as we learned about in London, with the aging population, the inability to attract drivers for the cabs, particularly the night cab system. You also have an aging population who's becoming more and more dependent upon vehicles that are equipped to provide them with accessibility. And you have the regulations that in some cases may seem excessive or burdensome. And there are those who spoke over the past couple of days about the opportunity to allow the marketplace to define the mix and makeup of the cab industry. And in some cases, most people, if you have an efficiently, smoothly running system, take for granted that you exist. But if something happens, all of a sudden, you're the target of media commentary about the inadequacy of the service that's being provided. And I've heard in comments from a number of different people that it's often just a few bad operators who really draw attention from the great work and service and quality of the good operators. So would this be a good assessment of what's been talked about over the past couple of days? Okay. So I passed my test in understanding the taxi industry. Now, on a personal level, I began selling hot dogs at a hot dog stand on Long Island when I was 12 years old, working illegally under the table, being paid less than minimum wage. But over the years, went on to a career in hospitality, working in restaurants, and eventually being trained in the International School of Mixology in Manhattan to be a bartender, and then became a manager of a disco back in 1972. As I look around the room, there are probably a few of you who were alive in 1972. Sometimes I don't have that luxury with my audience, but today I would suspect I'm pretty much on target with that. And then later went to open a restaurant in Pittsburgh and got my degree in hotel restaurant administration. And then got a graduate degree in counseling, where I was working counseling people arrested for drunk driving. And I began to see a correlation between what I used to do, which was basically get people drunk, with the people that I was trying to counsel about their alcohol problems. And so that's how I began the work that I'm doing now, creating the Responsible Hospitality Institute in 1983, principally focusing in on the importance and the need to train servers, bartenders, waiters, waitresses, in their responsibility in serving alcohol to the public. And was actively involved with a number of people from Ontario, from the Ontario Liquor Control Board, Barry Tucker, who was one of our key leaders, and various researchers and other people from the Ontario region, as well as people from Australia with the Patron Care Program, and from Europe, and from throughout the United States. So our early work, we brought together researchers and trainers and industry representatives from around the world, and we had a debate back in 1987, 1988, 1989, like the debate the other day about should people learn to be a driver online, or do you need that personal interaction? Because waiting on tables or serving drinks in a bar requires the personal interaction. And at the time, there was no such thing as the internet. Al Gore hadn't developed that yet, but there was no such thing. But there were people who started to put together CD training programs. And he was considered an outlier to our network of people who were trying to improve the quality of service. So over the years, as we began to advocate more for people to be trained, we began to appreciate the fact that people who work in bars and restaurants do what they're told by the people who manage and own the restaurants and the bars and the nightclubs. And then ultimately, how those businesses operate are influenced by various forces within the community. And that if you truly want to bring about positive change in the customer experience, both from a quality service and a safety perspective, you have to engage a broader sector of the community in some of your strategies. And that's what led us to form community alliances or partnerships, and eventually began to look at the trends within cities that made it obvious that a more coordinated system would be necessary. So that's what I'm going to talk about, is all of the factors, the driving forces that are affecting your industry the way that I've heard it, not only in this country, but in countries around the world, and the various ways in which people agree you have to take some action. Now, I'm going to give you a little education about the nightlife industry. Basically, the nightlife industry has some bad operators that make it difficult for the good operators to do business. And so therefore, because of some problems with one business, the community gets outraged and require more regulations that affect everybody. Nightlife is taken for granted. If you go down to the entertainment district here in Ontario, I was here a couple of years ago, you have some venues that are multi-floor that have 3,000 occupancy. So at any one time, you could have 3,000 people in those clubs. And at closing time, maybe a certain percentage of them are drunk and cause some problems, but the majority of them are actually having a good time, spending money, and socializing. There's no respect for the nightlife industry. People who are in the nightclub industry are often seen as part of a underground, corrupt, exploitive industry that's only out to serve lots of drinks and get people drunk and make lots of profits, and they don't care about the welfare of the community or what happens to anybody after they leave. They're composed of a lot of independent businesses, people who work, because they can't or choose not to work for companies or other things, so they invest and develop their own business. They tend not to be very well organized. They tend not to connect with each other. They are very suspect of their competitors. Their staff has a high turnover. It's very difficult to train them. They're very service-oriented. Their success is based upon how well they meet the needs of the customer, and they're being impacted by the demographics and the trends in policy. So does this sound familiar? So in many ways, when you're dealing with nightlife and you're dealing with the taxi industry, you have a lot more in common in terms of the structural framework that communities have to work with your industry and with the nightlife industry than there are differences. So we began this idea of creating a sociable city. That sociability is really why we exist. Do you come to this conference for the primary purpose of looking at a PowerPoint presentation that you could just read on a piece of paper, or do you come here because you want to meet with the people who you've met at previous conferences and you have relations with, and you go to the top of the tower and have drinks and hang out afterwards and move around the sidewalks? Sociability and relationships is what drives our life. In addition to counseling people with alcohol problems, I was a suicide prevention counselor. And over the years, I began to realize that the people who were calling because they felt there was no reason to live was because they had a perception that nobody would care, that they had no relationships. So in a way, that's what we live for, is relationships. And there was a study that was done by the Knight Foundation and Gallup in the US where they surveyed 43,000 people in 26 cities throughout the United States and asked them, why do you choose to live in the city where you live? And among the top 3 reasons, even more than the economy or safety or anything like that, socializing and the availability of nighttime activity was among the top 3 reasons why people chose to live in those cities. So we want to begin to think about how we can create and facilitate this other 9 to 5. But there's this attitude, this kind of negativity that's associated with nightlife, that singing and making of noise, as a rule, starts around 10 and lasts until 2 or 3, when the greater part of the company comes out drunk in order to continue the scandal on the street and insult the police. And this is what happens in cities all over. And in